Good afternoon and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us once again for another one of our complimentary webinars. It's lovely to see you and have you join us. There are several people just still joining at the same time, which is typical. If your colleagues are with us, no worries, we'll still let them in as we're joining. So I think many of you already know us, many of you know me, so I will just do an official introduction. My name is Zoe Lewis. I'm the CEO here at the Leadership Coaches, and we do what it says on the tin. We coach leaders. So our prime function is executive coaching. We do also get involved with team coaching, group coaching, leadership development and talent development programs. So I'm delighted today to be joined by Heather. Heather is one of our superb coaches. She always gets fantastic feedback. Honestly, she's a pleasure to work with as well. We get lots of great feedback, but also a delight to work with. Something I'd really like to share is that Heather is known for her global leadership experience. She coaches across the globe and she works with a number of different sectors and industries. So her expertise is very much backed up as we come into today's session where we focus on leadership shadow work. So I'm going to do what I usually do, which is disappear into the background and hand over to you. Thank you, Heather.
Wow, thank you so much, Zoe. I'm going to put my first slide on and just give a bit of context, really, as we move into this session. So in those years that I've been working around the globe and supporting leaders, one observation that's remained remarkably consistent is it's not what leaders consciously choose to do that has the greatest impact on culture. It's the patterns they're unaware of that are quietly shaping how others are thinking, feeling and performing. So today is definitely not about judging leaders or trying to create perfect leadership. Believe me, that doesn't exist. It's about becoming more conscious of the hidden dynamics that can quietly influence trust, psychological safety, resilience and organisational culture, particularly when leaders are under pressure. So my hope is that you'll leave today with a different lens through which to observe leadership, along with some practical ways to help leaders that you work with explore these patterns safely and constructively. So this webinar has been designed specifically for senior HR and OD professionals and combines some scientific grounding, practical organisational insight and psychologically safe development approaches to help organisations recognise and work more constructively with hidden leadership dynamics. So we'll be examining how unconscious leadership patterns, overplayed strengths and pressure responses can quietly shape organisational culture, trust, resilience and team performance. And we'll be using some reflection, a poll, and practical organisational examples that you are going to bring through your own observations without becoming overly personal or therapeutic. And we always look to encourage curiosity rather than judgment. And we'll be exploring patterns, themes and behaviours. And we'll be also demonstrating how a high support and high challenge learning environment is so important to support the work we all do in this space. You see, often the earliest signs of leadership shadow don't appear in personality tests or performance reviews. They appear in behavioural patterns under pressure, particularly during times of change or sustained organisational demand. These patterns can initially look highly effective: increased drive, control, resilience, responsiveness, strong emotional regulation, maintaining steady state, and even perfectionism are often rewarded and reinforced within organisations. But over time, when these behaviours become unconscious or overplayed, they then start to shape team dynamics, the emotional climate and culture in very unintended ways. And that is the start of the leadership shadow. By noticing these patterns early on, HR and OD professionals are often in a very unique position to support healthier leadership behaviours before they become embedded within team culture. So actually we are in a very unique position. So what I want you to do is just think about that position And just take a moment, and I'm going to leave this slide on just for a minute, but I'm going to help you with this process to answer and reflect on this question. So consider your own experiences. Which of these patterns show up most frequently in your organisation? So if you're not able to see the slide, they are 1, increased control, 2, emotional withdrawal, 3, perfectionism, 4, heroic overachieving, or 5, conflict avoidance. Now, to help you do this, just a little bit of maybe visualization for a moment. Just start to bring up in your mind's eye an image of the organisation, where you were this morning or last week, if you're away currently, and maybe see yourself in a regular meeting or in your one-to-ones, or even reading your emails. What are you observing about the behaviours and actions of the leaders you work with? It'll potentially be pretty subtle, but just really dig in there and just sort of note, is there anything you're starting to see potentially that is moving into a more unresourceful behaviour? So I just want you to make a note of that, as this is really important intelligence. We don't often take time to do this, do we? Because we're usually pretty busy day to day. But just now, just get a sense of what actually you are noticing, and we'll work with this later on in the session. So let's start at the very beginning to explore the concept of leadership shadow and where it all comes from, and what the science tells us, and why these hidden dynamics matter far more to organisational culture and performance than we often realise. So Carl Jung introduced the concept of the shadow to describe the parts of ourselves that sit outside of conscious awareness. Those hidden patterns and traits, overdeveloped coping strategies, unconscious emotional drivers. And these often emerge most visibly under pressure, during uncertainty, in relationships, personal and professional, and in positions of authority. Really interesting. The shadow is not bad behaviour. I'm going to make that really clear. It can include things such as overplayed strengths, protective adaptations, emotional armour that we build around us, and behaviours that were once highly effective and rewarded. So while the leadership shadow can often sound a bit like an abstract concept, the reality is its effects are often highly visible within day-to-day organisational life. So I want to now take a step further and look at how Jung's work aligns and combines with more modern thinking and concepts, the ones that you will be dealing with and speaking about regularly. So I'm going to take us around a bit of a circle here. We've already looked at, I guess that's 1 o'clock, isn't it? Psychology with Jung. So I'm going to move us clockwise. And the first area we're going to look at, touch on very briefly, is neuroscience, sort of relatively new in terms of leadership. I mean, it's been around about sort of 20, 30 years, but new in terms of some of the other approaches. And this is all around what happens to leadership behaviours under pressure and stress. Now, the key insight here and the relevance is that many leadership shadow behaviours are adaptive stress responses that start to become overused or unconscious over time. So they form a habit. So they're used even when there isn't stress that we need to adapt to. The next area is emotional intelligence, and this is the work of Daniel Goleman. Now, we'll all know about the focus here around self-awareness. Everything starts with self, and then self-management, self-efficacy, and relationship management. The key insight here and the link to leadership shadow is that leaders' emotional states and behavioural patterns literally ripple through teams and will influence them. Teams do not only absorb a leader's decision, they absorb their emotional patterns too. And moving round to about 7 o'clock, we've got systems thinking and organisational patterns, so the work of Peter Senge. And the focus here and the alignment is that organisations are actually living systems where behavioural patterns become embedded over time. And the key insight for us is what remains unconscious in leadership often becomes a cultural norm. Okay, so it gets really embedded into all the systems within an organization. Just think how many there are in your organization. And then we move around to an area which we'll all be very familiar with. This is psychological safety and team culture, the work of Amy Edmondson. And the theme here is that leadership behavior strongly shapes learning cultures, innovation, trust, and psychological safety. So when you have that there, people are more likely to innovate, speak up, and try new things and find new ways of doing things. And the insight for us all here today is that the leadership shadow becomes organizational culture when those unconscious patterns are repeated often enough. And then finally, the leadership derailment research. So this is the work of Robert Hogan and Dr. Paul Brewerton at StrengthScope. So the findings here and how it links is that these derailers, we're going to call them, often emerge during pressure. And this is where somebody's strengths then become overplayed. So they get dialed up or used inappropriately or too much. And the insight for us all today is that these behaviours, the ones that drive leadership success, the ones that we actually want and encourage, can also become the behaviours that limit teams and cultures when left unexamined or unexplored. So I think what's really fascinating here is that these fields all emerged independently, often decades apart, and yet they all converge towards a remarkably similar conclusion, which is in the centre of my circle there. And often, what leaders are least aware of in themselves becomes what teams experience most strongly. I think there's some good things just for you to sit and reflect on in terms of these areas and potentially how they are now linking to some of the things that you've noticed already in your visualization earlier. So it is about that noticing now. If these different fields all point towards the importance of unconscious leadership patterns, the next question then is, well, how do these dynamics actually show up in organizations? You know, what do I need to see to know that there's something going on? Now, remember, as I said earlier, the leadership shadow rarely announces itself loudly. It's quietly working away there in the background, nuanced. More often it shows up in that everyday atmosphere, those behaviours, the way a communication is written. And then teams tend to follow that and adapt around it over time. As I said, we're in a very unique position because we often can notice from our sort of zoomed out position these shadow effects before the leaders themselves do, as they're kind of like almost inside the shell, aren't they? They're inside and they're not always noticing the shadow that they are indeed sharing with everybody in the organisation. So what I'm going to ask us to do now is to, again, step back into the everyday life of your organisation and just do a little bit more work on this, as you've started that process already. And I'd love you to please contribute to our live activity today via an anonymous Slido word cloud, which in a moment I'll switch my screen and we'll see the word cloud forming with all the contributions that you're going to share to the question that I'm posing, which is, what are the day-to-day signs that hidden leadership patterns may be shaping team culture? So there's two ways for you to do this. I'm going to leave this on for a moment, don't worry. You can either get your mobile phone and scan the QR code, and you will be taken live into Slido. You don't have to sort of log in and do any kind of downloading. Or if you don't have your phone and you can access, entering the slido.com, again, you will see that green screen and you will use that pin to take you into the live poll. So I'm just going to leave that on there just for a few seconds, just for you to all choose your method. Thank you so much. And then I'm going to share the screen live in Slido. Actually, when I do share the screen, the details and the QR code do come up. So if you do miss it, you have a second opportunity. So I'm going to do that right now. Briefly see me for a moment. And I'm going to share Slido. Oh, wow, it's working. Okay, so I'm just going to leave it on because it will build as we go through. I'll let you absorb what is appearing on the screen. So again, if you want to put something else in, if there's maybe a secondary area that you're suddenly thinking, oh, I wish I'd put that, you can do that. Oh gosh, yes, that's a big one. And a few people have put that. I just love watching it all happen in real time. It's quite exciting, isn't it? I think a few people are still typing, so I'm just going to leave it up there. We do have time. So just watch what's appearing on the screen and get a sense of, is this what I'm seeing? Or is it different? What am I noticing? What have I had a conversation about just recently, for example? So what is emerging here for us? Gosh. Okay, so I think most people have probably put something in by now. I'm just going to leave it at 5 seconds. But thank you so much, everybody who has participated. And I think there are definitely some clusters here, definitely around sort of maybe some withdrawal side, so not speaking up, less willing to participate, sort of lack, detachment. There's a bit of that, isn't there? And then there's the other side as well. There's sort of a bit more kind of sort of like explosive emotion around. I'm feeling angry. I'm seeing, you know, people are getting angry and they're getting sort of passive aggressive. So it's a more kind of not so explosive, but it's still anger. And I guess, you know, defensiveness also can be demonstrated in that way. And I'm also seeing, you know, illness and potentially, you know, some well-being issues forming here. So clear patterns emerging. Thank you so much. And, you know, not all related to behaviour, some to environment, atmosphere, pressure and adaptation. You know, walls putting up. I mean, that's somebody literally doing something, isn't it? Kind of saying, I'm putting walls up around me to protect me. And is that because of what's going on currently in the environment? And what we're describing here are often the ripple effects of repeated pressure behaviours that gradually become embedded within organisational culture. So, you know, and looks like some are starting to build and build here. So it's good that you're here today, so we can start to look at some of the things to help you. And just want you to remember, these are not fixed personality types or labels. They are adaptive patterns that are becoming overplayed and or unconscious over time. So thank you so much for sharing. That was really, really helpful. I'm just going to stop sharing on the slide and go back to our main slide. So thank you so much for doing that and sort of start moving us into exploring what we can do here. So thank you for working on the poll for me. So I'm going to take us into our next slide. And I want to explore with you 4 of the most common leadership shadow patterns that organisations and teams often find themselves adapting around. And some of the things that came up in the word cloud are going to fit into these 4 kind of archetypes that I have put here. There are many others, but these are the 4 most common. So at their healthiest, these patterns often began as strengths, remember? The shadow emerged when the behaviour became overused, used inappropriately, unconsciously, or is deeply intensified with pressure in the organisation. Now, these patterns are all driven by something that sits underneath that behaviour. Really important to share this. So if we look at the hero, and I'll go into each in a bit more detail. So the hero underneath is, I must be needed. I must be needed. That's the driver for the hero. For the controller archetype, I must keep things under control. I must keep things under control. For the avoider, I must avoid disharmony. Must avoid disharmony. And the achiever, I must succeed. Okay. So we're going to take a quick look at each of these patterns to help us recognise how leadership shadow can show up in our leaders within organisations. So let's begin with the pattern that many organisations initially admire and reward very heavily. So on the surface, hero leaders often appear deeply committed, dependable, and endlessly willing to step in when the pressure rises. These are the people other people rely on. They're the fixers, often the rescuers, the ones who are literally holding everything together. There are 3 key areas on this slide, and I'd just like you to just work your way through them. So the first area looks at how this often shows up. So these are some of the behaviours or actions that you will notice in the hero archetype. So for example, taking responsibility away from others to fix and help and support. So the intention is good, but of course, when it's overused, it becomes potentially a derailer. And then the next area is about looking wider, the ripple effect. So the organisational indicators, so that's that zoom out. So culturally, what are we noticing? This firefighting, this escalation culture, or everything goes up, everything goes up. That dependency on the leader. And then finally, how this ripples out. How this ripples out, so this sort of the medium to long-term effects. You may be noticing this already in burnout and exhaustion, so linked to the wellness. Some reduced empowerment, people sort of, not feeling like they want to do anything or they can do anything because everybody looks to the leader to do it all. And that then resulting in things like learned helplessness. Okay, so that's the first archetype. Let's move on to our next archetype, which is the controller. And again, on the surface, the controller is highly organized, decisive, and in control. And they will often provide clarity, structure, and bring order to complexity. And teams do value their direction, the standards they set, and their ability to keep everything on track. Just take a look then at how the shadow shows up, that micromanagement, that reluctance, that discomfort then with ambiguity or uncertainty, because they feel that loss of control. And then look at the cultural effect, these layers of approval that are required. This permission, lack of autonomy, and reduced challenge in meetings, people not speaking up. That came up in the word cloud as well. And those longer term effects, what happens when this archetype plays out over and over. This is what you start to notice long term. Definitely lower innovation and creativity, as within control. That stifling effect does not allow for great creativity, for example. This might be something that you're noticing happening in your organisation. I'm just going to move on to our third archetype. This is the avoider. And on the surface, the avoider leader often appears calm, thoughtful, and easy to get on with. So they value harmony and they strive constantly to maintain positive relationships. Often seen as approachable, diplomatic, and emotionally steady. So again, strengths. However, when overplayed, when used with more intensity than is appropriate, this is how it can show up, the shadow effect. So that delaying of difficult conversations, I don't want to upset. That softening of feedback, not really saying is needed to be said. And sort of that over-accommodation to reduce tension. Just want to keep things calm around here, when sometimes actually discomfort is what is required. And then that wider cultural piece, unclear accountability, difficult behaviours left unaddressed, which can then escalate and spiral, and with a lot more sort of time and resource required. And then there's long-term ripple effects, a sense of artificial harmony. It sort of feels one thing, but it actually isn't. It's sort of a masking effect, which actually isn't good at all. Unresolved conflict. This move away from high trust, because actually it feels like we say something, but it just floats away. Nothing ever happens or changes. And people disengage and check out as a result. And then I move to the final one, which is the achiever. So this is a really interesting one, because on the surface, the achiever archetype often appears ambitious, focused, and relentlessly driven to deliver exceptional results. They set highly ambitious goals, they have high standards, and they create momentum and pace. Their determination, discipline, and commitment to excellence often inspire others to perform at their best. But it's that drive for constant success and that pace and urgency is what actually is shown and comes through in the achiever. They're constantly raising performance expectations. Now, of course, you might say, well, actually, we want things to move, but we need them to move at a pace that's right for people. They don't take a moment potentially to consider what else is happening around them. And they're modeling that always on productivity and output. And that's not how humans are built. They need recovery and adaptation to perform. And there's organizational indicators, long hours, success tied closely to, output, the what, rather than the how. And then people feeling guilty then because actually, well, I'm not sort of putting in 18 hours a day. And then boundaries sort of fall away. And there's ripple effects again, burnout and exhaustion, which we saw coming up in the word cloud, emotional suppression, which can then come out either explosively through anger or through passive aggressive, and just that sense of actually, well, no one's allowed to fail around here, and that then reduces psychological safety and makes it, not a nice place to be. So those are the 4 key archetypes, and I think probably if you think about, your organisation, you'll definitely be identifying with at least one or maybe all of them, maybe one more than another. I think it's really good for you to get a sense actually how it shows up. It came from strengths, it came from, a great place, but something's happened. And now it's becoming something which actually we want to help and support the leaders with. So how do we do that? How do we do this? Number one, leaders rarely have a conversation about shadow when they feel attacked, exposed, or psychologically unsafe. Awareness only becomes possible when challenge is paired with trust, curiosity, and emotional safety. So we have to create the conditions for these conversations to happen. That's the first port of call. And again, I put 5 on here. There are some others, but I think these are my top 5. I would certainly recommend for somebody who does shadow work daily. It's important to normalise pressure behaviours. What I mean is not something's wrong with you, not that you would say that, but that's not what we're on about here. It's really about actually these are common adaptive responses under pressure. This is what happens. This is the human condition. Okay, so it's about that normalising that this does happen. Okay. And it's not there's something wrong with you, this is normal, really important. And remember, most leadership shadow begins as a strength that becomes overextended under pressure. And that's an interesting way and one of the ways to start the conversation off. And I'll talk to you a bit more about that in a moment. Number 2, start with organisational observations. So maybe zoom out a bit first. Not you are controlling. Instead, what patterns are you noticing emerging within the team as a question? Okay, so don't sort of go zoom right in on the person. Start a bit wider to explore this. So start systemically first, then move inwards. Much safer psychologically. And then focus on impact, not identity. Instead of you are an avoidant, use instead what impact might this behaviour be having on challenge and openness within the team. So again, you're opening the conversation without attacking and potentially having a defensive response. This preserves dignity whilst increasing awareness. That's so important. These are great leaders you're working with, remember. Really important to build reflective cultures before sort of crisis happens. So what I mean by that, it's not all about interventions all the time, like, oh my goodness, this has happened, this, you're firefighting, you feel like there's always some sort of crisis. So think about embedding things like reflective leadership practices, such as getting, all your leaders maybe at the end of sort of, I don't know, a piece of work they've done to do a bit of reflective practice. What's going well for them? What's not going so well for them? What are they learning? Start to bring that in as a habit so they can start to do a bit of self-examination. Regular debriefs after activities. Again, if you just do a debrief once every 3 months or 6 months, again, it becomes more intense. So do them all the time, but normalising debriefs. In coaching conversations, make that more of a norm. So one-to-ones, peers, coaching circles. So start building these cultures, to enable these conversations to happen. And it's all about the discussion of pressure behaviours before things start to go off the rails, using psychologically safe methods, e.g. exploring strengths and what happens when somebody overplays a strength. That's what I would absolutely recommend to start building in to your practices. And then finally, the environment. And this is key. So we talk about high support, high challenge, and I'll give you some examples of that in a moment. But if you've got too much challenge in your environment, that under pressure times and change times and uncertain times, which is generally what 95% of organisations are experiencing, it brings out defensiveness, and that's not going to help. Conversely, if you've got too much support, so if you've gone down the other way and you're really nurturing, it's high comfort, potentially collusion, and that's not going to create the environment for people to start looking at themselves and making some shifts and change. But together, you get growth and awareness. So you want to get that balance of high support and high challenge. And I'm going to share that with you shortly. But before I do, I want to give you a framework to have that conversation. And culture changes one conversation at a time. And this is a great framework that you can start using right now. It might be something you're already doing. If it is, carry on, please. But I've just put the SAFE framework together. So something that I use a lot. And it creates that psychological safety when I'm coaching leaders. So the first thing is about spotting and noticing, again, without judgment. So, what tends to happen to this particular strength under stress, or what patterns emerge when pressure increases in the department, or what are you experiencing more frequently from you in the team right now? So again, it's about opening the individual up to notice and spot some of the patterns and trends and themes. So this is observation before interpretation, to help them spot the pattern. Then gently explore what might be driving this particular behaviour or action. So what feels important to hold on to? What becomes uncomfortable if you don't respond this way? Or what might this behaviour be helping protect? Finding out a little bit more about what actually is underneath the behaviour. And then it's about the impact. So it's then exploring, okay, so what actually is the impact of that particular behaviour, which is the shadow, of course. So how might others experience this behaviour over time? And what conversations might become harder around this pattern you've identified? Great systems thinking questions here, beautiful questions. And then finally, we want to move to some behavioural change. That's the most important part. And this is about experimentation. So what you want to do is encourage small shifts, okay, small shifts. So for example, what could you do to create a little bit more space, or a little bit more challenge, or a little bit more whatever it is in your team? Or what would experimenting differently look like over the next few weeks? What might a small shift look like here for you? Very important, not fixing. This is about experimentation. Goal of shadow work is not to remove human perfection from leadership. Not at all. It is purely to increase awareness sufficiently that unconscious patterns stop leading and entering the room before the leader does. So this is really important work for us to do to help leaders and to set them up for success. Of course, frameworks alone are rarely enough. The way these conversations are held matters enormously. So I've given you the questions. We've looked at sort of the 5 areas of conditions to create the right environment. But remember, too much challenge without support can trigger defensiveness or shame, and too much support without challenge can unintentionally reinforce avoidance or collusion. And of course, if you've got the others, you go into areas like disengagement and withdrawal. So if you're not even looking at it, then people are actually checking out. And just to get a sense of what that looks like, you can go, okay, Heather, I know what support and challenge mean, but just give me a sense of some of the sort of the hows and some of the behaviours that I need to be adopting. Well, it's about number 1 in support, curiosity. Be curious. I'm curious. I want to find out more. Have empathy. I understand that sounds really tough. Yeah, those figures are not what we were looking for. Non-judgment, always. So you're noticing, you're observing. Reflective listening. So what I'm hearing is that right? Compassion, absolutely compassion for the other person. And normalising those human pressure responses. Just letting them know that actually there is something actually that happens to us in pressure. Let me talk to you about it. Let me share this with you. And then what does high challenge look like? Let me share that with you. So that's about naming patterns honestly. So that's actually saying, what I noticed, what I saw, and exploring the impact directly. I'd like to share this with you and talk to you about this, as it's really important. Holding accountability. How can I help you? How can I support you? And inviting difficult reflection. So sitting a bit in silence sometimes. Let somebody do the work when you pose the question. Don't rush in to answer or fix or heal. And challenge assumptions. Somebody might say, oh, well, we've always wanted hero leaders here, well, let's actually think about that. Is that actually what we want right now? What is a hero leader? And how does that serve us now? And also exploring unintended consequences. So letting people see what that ripple effect is. Because remember, when you're in the shell yourself, you are not always aware of the effect of the ripple. So the goal here is not to make leaders feel like comfortable. It's to make them feel supported in a space that they can be open enough to reflect honestly. That is the support and challenge matrix. And just want to move on and just share some other questions with you. I mean, these are some of my favourites. There are many more out there. I think you'll notice from the way these questions are framed, do please try them and use some of them, that they will kind of invoke that more open response, because they're the what questions, the how questions. And I've grouped them in areas. And it is, I would follow, I mean, with coaching, of course, you can go up and back, but I would definitely start with awareness and impact and then invite deeper reflection. Because that's really important to enable those elements to come out first before you start looking at shift and then culture and then accountability. But there's some beautiful questions in here. I don't think I've got a favourite. I think they're all my favourites, really. But I think the awareness ones are really the most important ones. And it is about that normalising under pressure in times of change when we're going through uncertain times. So you show that you are supporting at that very early stage, and then the challenge then comes in afterwards. So I'm just going to leave them on there just for a few more seconds, just so you can maybe look down and say, oh yes, I used that one, or there's one I'm definitely going to use. As I said, a number of them you'll be using already. Just a note, definitely don't use the why question. I mean, I mean, it can be used when you're doing like the 5 whys or problem solving, but in instances in coaching, it can sometimes make somebody feel a bit defensive. So please stick to the sort of the what and the how and the who. They definitely open up the conversation beautifully. Okay, thank you. So before we move into the question and answer part of the session, I'd like to create a little bit of space for you for reflection and integration. So with topics like leadership shadow, the real value comes not from just understanding the concepts intellectually, but from really noticing what that means to us personally and organisationally. I've put 3 questions here on the screen, and I'd like you to just take a look at those right now. The first one is definitely around the feeling. So sort of kind of what are you feeling is most important. The second one is much more around kind of starting to think about, well, what actually can I start doing with my colleagues to create this space, this environment to have these conversations, and maybe a sort of a thought specifically that you're leaving with today generally about some leadership shadow work. And while you're reflecting, you know, that's potentially going to inform you in terms of a question that you'd like to bring into the Q&A. I'm certainly delighted to help further and support you. So I'm just going to leave those on there just for 30 seconds, if that's okay. And then we will move to the final part of today's session. So a big thank you from me for listening. There's a lot of information there. I really appreciate it. Just finally, leadership shadow work is not about perfect leadership. I can say that again. It is all about increasing awareness sufficiently so that those unconscious patterns are no longer shaping the culture automatically. And we have got a really big part to play in that. So thank you so much for being part of the conversation.
Thank you so much, Heather. That is an excellent session. Lots and lots of rich quality information. Thank you so much. So we'll pop down the slide, and then we don't have any questions in the Q&A just yet. But if you would like to pop some questions in there, feel free to do so. I do have a couple of questions to pose to you, if that's okay.
Please.
So I was just thinking, as I do, about typical challenges that we see. So one of the first things I was jotting down is, what if they disagree? What if the person disagrees that the strength that is being overplayed is detrimental? And I have an example, which I won't go into in too much detail, but they definitely are not in a position where they're getting the feedback that they need from their direct reports.
Yeah.
But at the same time, they're being told by other people that that's what's happening. The feedback's not coming from the direct reports. There's nothing major going wrong.
Okay.
So I'm curious, and I don't think that this is a sole situation. What sort of advice would you give to somebody, particularly, I guess, a line manager working with that individual, where the peers are saying, yes, they're a problem, the direct reports are too scared to speak up. So the manager is saying, no, there's no problem.
Yeah, I think this can be quite common. We find it, don't we? Just generally, even with feedback. So the shadow is part of feedback that we'd be giving, and so I'd probably get a little bit more creative. I might get them to do some little bit of self-analysis work, do a little sort of strengths questionnaire, or just pull something off and start talking generally about the concept of strength and how it overplays. And maybe I might give some examples, some case studies about what I'd seen, what I'd noticed when I work with leaders around the globe. Again, normalizing, really important, because at that point there might be, well, it doesn't happen to me because we don't do pressure around here. But I think so there's that bit of normalizing, some case study, maybe a bit more self-analysis work through some light touch profiling, nothing heavy, but just bring the conversation in and then just kind of get the person to see it from a wider perspective and then start to relate it to themselves. What do you think?
Yeah.
Did that work, do you think?
I think it all depends on the situation, doesn't it? And
always.
The person's ability to be able to go there as well. I always think this, we can take people so far. Sometimes if they're not ready, then we can't always take them there.
I agree with you, and I think you make a very good point there. I think it's important at this level to understand the unintended consequences, the ripple effect. So that is what I would be talking a bit more about. Somebody in a senior position, about the importance of leaders, that case study examples. Look what happened, and you can bring in some really major examples. You can look at things like Boeing 737 Max, for example. What happened there? There was leadership shadow. There was a low trust environment, and so there are some quite meaty stories out there that you can see these unintended consequences, big derailers.
Superb, thank you very much. I have another one for you as well. So where are we? So if we've got an organisation where we've got the leadership shadow here is, so I'm going to take it as a merger or an acquisition, because I think that's a typical one we see.
Lots of those.
So we have the two camps, and Camp A and Camp B are in different places. So Camp A are siloed, Camp B are siloed. Camp A are actually, this is the best thing that we've seen. We're all motivated. We're all engaged. Camp B is, this is the worst thing that we've seen. We don't want to be here. And so the two sets of behaviours that are coming out are very different leadership shadows, but collective. Any views on that one?
Oh, that's a good one.
Sorry, probably the most difficult questions coming from me rather than the audience.
We can have a So I think you need to work in two spaces here, probably three in a way. So you need to work individually with both of the sort of parties, as it were, separately, okay? Because that's really important. Because when you're ideally when you're going into a merger or acquisition, you want to sort of be coming in the best place you can be, because it can take it takes 7 years, they say, don't they, to kind of build new cultures. So remember, it's about embedding these things early on. So don't wait to start kind of addressing shadows before they appear. But I appreciate, obviously, things are intensified during change. And then I think once you've sort of kind of done a bit of that, then think about what I call the third alternative. So instead of saying, so we don't want to create a new shadow, so we want to, what sort of leaders do we aspire to be now? So actually, kind of we know that things happen and, after change and mergers, but actually, what do we want to be like now as a collective? So start bringing them to think about, actually, what is the new way that we want to be here? Start early, start early with any intervention. Don't wait until it's merger day. Then that shadow is going to be huge and very confusing. I
think that's some really sound advice, and probably also true of a lot of change that we see, because we typically get brought in at the latter stages. They've merged, they've been acquired, there are problems. And I completely agree with you, actually, nip it in the bud. Prevention is better than cure. I think that should be the tagline for anything to do with leadership and management. Get in early.
I agree. I mean, it's a sound intervention. I mean, it's, if you look at systems or process or product, which I do. I'm very interested in with my engineering clients. You don't want to wait until the sort of the machine's on dry or frictioning. You get in early. So why do we not do it with human systems?
Let's hope we make some influence with this webinar. So, okay, we do have a question as well from the audience. So, sorry I joined late and my question may have already been covered. As a manager, how do I spot my own leadership shadow after proactively seeking feedback without any constructive feedback? So I've read that right. As a manager, how do I spot my own leadership shadow after proactively seeking feedback without anything constructive? That's what we were talking about a little bit, wasn't it?
Yes.
Follow up on that.
Yes. So it's a self-analysis piece. If nothing's coming back, maybe you haven't got it. Maybe your shadow is only very small, so that might be the reason why. But if it's actually you're not getting anything back, period, then that's the piece where we go into self-work and ideally work with a trusted peer or a coach. Somebody that can hold that space and help you explore it. But it's good.
Yeah,
we've all got one. We've all got one. So it's normalizing. So it's all good.
All human behaviour, absolutely. Something that's just occurred to me as well, which we build into a lot of our programs, is 360s. And I think that we found where organisations come to us as opposed to doing it internally is that there's less trust internally, whereas when they're coming to us, there's that safety net of actually this is an external organisation. Of course, that depends on how we contract as well. But I think that 360s can enable that blind spot to be visible.
Yes, I agree, and it is about the blind spot. That's certainly the thing, and understanding that it often came from a good place, a strength that's now overused, and I think that's really important for people to. That's why we want to start those conversations in that place.
Yeah, definitely. Yesterday I was working with one of our clients and we were talking about. I was thinking about when you're talking about safe, because we were covering the topic of delegation yesterday. And when something's going wrong with delegation and we choose to step in too quickly or we over control, it is of course coming from a place of protection. I want to do that for a good reason. So I'm with you, completely stripping it back to what's driving it so that they can see that it's the strength, and when it maybe the volume's just turned a little bit too loud, perhaps that's when it starts to impede them as an effective leader.
It is, and as I said, it doesn't announce itself loudly most of the time. Sometimes it does, but generally it's that quiet, nuanced shift, slightly. So again, with early intervention, it can go back and not be noticed.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it takes a lot for leaders to be that vulnerable as well. And again, the safety, I guess, being with us as a coach is that they've got that safe space where they can, we deal with some deep work, don't we?
We do. I totally agree with you, Zoe. As I said, it's important work, and the space we hold, our experience, the fact that we've been through mergers and acquisitions as leaders ourselves, so we're carrying, some understanding as well, will help with that sort of normalizing, and can, we've got examples anonymized or safe to share, so people feel right. Okay, so let me tell you my story now. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely, lovely, superb. Right, we have no further questions. Is there anything else that you'd like to share, Heather?
No, I just think this is a great topic for everybody to again to explore your own shadow. Very important, because that's something we always start with us when we're doing this work. So please seek out some good feedback, work with your own coaches. There's lots of great books and resources out there. You just have to Google it, and many more archetypes. But it's a really interesting subject for your own personal development, and then to help other people be their best. So thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate it. Thank you, Zoe.
Thank you, Heather. I think it was superbly insightful, and everyone who's joined us today, thank you so much. I know some of you are already clients with us, some of you are not. If you are clients with us and this has already resonated, speak to your account manager and we can potentially look at how we can get you some support in order to connect that. And if you're not working with us, we'd love to have a chat. And so just from all of us here at the Leadership Coaches to you, thank you so much for giving up some time with us today. You will receive a recording. We'll also send you out a little aid memoir from today, and do feel free to sign up for future webinars. Thank you so much. Thanks again.
Thank you.
We have some hearts coming in there. That's lovely.
Oh, that's nice. Thank you, everybody.